Good evening and welcome to the City of Carpinteria Coastal Land Use Plan / General Plan Update Committee meeting for June 17th, 2024. And may we have a roll call, please?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Prior to roll call, I would like to make clear for the record that this this General Plan Update Committee meeting is being conducted pursuant to California Government Code Section 54953, in that Commissioner Salant will be participating in this meeting by teleconference. In accordance with the Brown Act, the teleconference location has been identified in the notice and the agenda for this meeting. I'll now conduct the roll call, after which I will confirm certain matters for the record. So roll call, Mayor Clark,
Here.
Councilmember Lee,
Here.
Commissioner Benefield,
Here.
and Commissioner Slant.
Here.
Great, and just bear with me for a moment while I briefly go through a few special procedures required by the Brown Act. I would now like to request that Commissioner Salant respond to the following questions. Commissioner Salant, can you hear me well?
I certainly can.
Were you able to hear our proceedings up until now?
Yes.
Do you have a copy of the agenda for this meeting?
Yes.
Is the agenda posted at the location where you are?
Yes, it is.
And is your location reasonably accessible to the public such that any member of the public could participate in this teleconference from your location if they wish to do so?
Yes.
And is there any member of the public there with you who would like to participate in the public comment portion of this meeting or otherwise address any agenda item for this meeting?
No.
Thank you. I'd now like to ask that any member of the General Plan Update Committee speak up at this time if they are unable to clearly hear Commissioner Salant. Hearing no comment, the record will reflect that all committee members present have indicated that they are able to hear Commissioner Salant, and that concludes my remarks.
Okay. We'll go to public comments. Time for public comments on matters not otherwise on the agenda of the General Plan Update Committee, but within the subject matter jurisdiction of the Coastal Land Use Plan / General Plan Update Committee. And seeing none? Anybody on Zoom? All right, we'll close the public comment period and go to item number 3 on the agenda, which is review and approval of meeting action minutes.
I move to approve.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, do you have to do a roll call?
I guess we should, since someone's remote. Mayor Clark,
Aye.
Councilmember Lee,
Aye.
Commissioner Benefield,
Yes.
Commissioner Slant,
Aye.
passes unanimous.
All right, now we're going to item number 4, which is overview of administrative draft of the open space / conservation element.
Thank you. You may remember Taylor Lane is here with us from WSP as part of the General Plan Update team, and Taylor's going to give our presentation this evening.
Thank you so much, Minnie. Can everybody hear me all right?
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you. Good evening. Happy Monday. So happy to be here to be giving the presentation for the open space and conservation element. Just a quick overview of this element. The open space and conservation element intends or has been updated to fully replace the open space, recreation, and conservation element from the 2003 General Plan Update or General Plan Update Coastal Land Use Plan. The updated open space and conservation element covers 2 elements mandated by state law, combined into a single chapter, of course, that is the open space and conservation element. These 2 elements were previously combined within the 2003 General Plan, Coastal Land Use Plan update, as is very common for many other jurisdictions preparing their general plans. So this is very par for the course. Just a quick overview of the roles and responsibilities of, or roles and relationship of the open space and conservation element. The open space element is required to provide an inventory of open spaces within the city. This includes unimproved and designated areas as open space, such as natural resource protection, the protection of production of resources such as agricultural spaces, spaces for outdoor recreation, spaces promoting public health and safety, military installations, and areas containing known historic or tribal cultural resources. The open space element guides the provision and management of these resources. Conversely, the conservation element identifies sensitive resources within the community that are protected and preserved for their environmental and cultural resources value, including lands, waters, and forests, environmentally sensitive habitats, or ESHA, sensitive species, agricultural resources, water resources, minerals, and mineral resource extraction zones or sites, paleontological resources, and visual resources. Due to the interrelationship of the open space and conservation resources, the city's COUP general plan combines these required elements into one chapter. The open space inventory for the open space and conservation element, again, is a required aspect of the open space element per state law. This inventory provides a summary of all of the city parks and recreational facilities, as well as designated open spaces based on land use within the city. Based on these land use designations, open spaces include public parks, creek corridors, beaches, and agricultural areas. In total, these amount to about 188 acres within the city, or about 15% of the city's total acreage. Of this 188 acres, 125 of this are designated city parks and recreational facilities or improved recreational facilities. The recreational element that was identified or included in the open space and recreation and conservation element of the 2003 general plan, coastal land use plan update, focuses on those recreational elements, those city facilities. You may recall from a few general plan update committee meetings that we held a few months ago, we did discuss public services and facilities. That is not discussed in detail, or at least the management of those facilities in this section of the element, because those are public facilities and were addressed in that element of the update. As part of the inventory, another 31 acres are identified as agricultural lands within the city, or about 3%. The remainder of open spaces in the city include areas designated for resource protection, outdoor recreation, and production of resources. Some open space areas not within the city's area and within the Carpinteria planning area that include very valuable resources or areas specific or important to the city and the community include areas such as the foothill agricultural areas up off of 192 and other areas, Los Padres National Forest, and the Carpinteria Salt Marsh. Again, these are not city-owned facilities, but due to their importance to the community within the Carpinteria planning area, they are discussed in this section, and policies are crafted to support the preservation and coordination with agencies responsible for the management of these facilities to keep them for the interest of the public. Of the open spaces that are included or identified in the open space elements, perhaps the most important is the Carpinteria Bluffs. The Carpinteria Bluffs includes 2 public open spaces that are designated open space and recreation based on the city's land use map. These include the Carpinteria Bluffs Nature Preserve, which comes in at a total of 44.7 acres, and the Rincon Bluffs Preserve, which totals 21 acres. Other privately owned open space facilities include the former oil and gas facilities, which is 58.5 acres, the Tea Time Practice Center, 10.7 acres, farmland and crop areas along the bluffs, coming in at 10.7 acres, Viola Fields Park Facilities, again, a city park facility, which is 7.4 acres, research, development, and industrial uses, which total 20 acres, and undeveloped parcels, which total 3.4 acres. The open space element focuses on the protection and management of these open space resources, particularly the preservation and restoration of public open spaces such as the Carpinteria Bluffs Nature Preserve and Rincon Bluffs Preserve. The protection of open spaces, natural resources, and access to public open space in the coast is a very important aspect of the open space element. This includes protection, preservation, restoration of resources such as ESHA, the windrows along the bluff, and native vegetation. The element also focuses on the protection of open space for agriculture, agricultural activities, agricultural soils, the provision of public trails, parks, and beach access within those open spaces, and the preservation of visual and open space quality along the bluffs. Important to this element is the distinction or designation definition of environmentally sensitive habitats. The city lies entirely within the coastal zone, and as such, the open space element defines ESHA consistent with the Coastal Act. The definition of environmentally sensitive habitat areas within the open space element reads as any area in which plant or animal life or their habitats are either rare or especially vulnerable because of their special nature or role in an ecosystem, and which could be easily disturbed or degraded by human activities and development. With that definition, the designation of environmentally sensitive habitats within the city falls into one of two buckets. This is either designation of ESHA based on the presence of valuable or rare valuable habitats. So things like Carpinteria Creek Woodlands, Carpinteria Salt Marsh, Tar Pits Park, Carpinteria Bluffs Nature Preserve, Rincon Bluffs, and the dunes at the beach. As well as offshore areas such as the reefs and habitats. Again, these are much broader habitat areas that provide a larger ecosystem value or more ecosystem values and promote or support other rare, sensitive, or endangered plants, species, or wildlife or habitat. The second bucket of that is ESHA, that is based on or defined by areas based on the individual wildlife species. So areas dedicated or solely utilized by a specific species or resource. Great examples of this include critical habitat for critically or threatened endangered species, and good examples include Carpinteria Harbor Seal haul-out areas and rookery and the monarch bluffs or the monarch butterfly roosts. Based on the extent of ESHA within the city, the open space and conservation element includes a large focus of the protection and management of ESHA, as defined on the previous slide and under the Coastal Act. Objectives and policies within the open space element are organized as follows. Policies protecting ESHA that meet the criteria and definition from the Coastal Act, including policies requiring avoidance, minimization, and mitigation of impacts from site development or potential disturbance of that ESHA. Number two, policies addressing protection, preservation, restoration, and avoidance of impacts to wetlands and vernal pools. Number three, policies addressing protection and preservation of shoreline habitats. These include policies addressing or supporting management of the Carpinteria Harbor Seal haul-out area. Number four, policies addressing protection, preservation, and restoration of the avoidance of impacts to riparian habitats and creek corridors, such as Carpinteria Creek. Number five, policies addressing protection, restoration, avoidance of impacts, and planting of native vegetation communities and specimen trees. One thing to note on this is that does also include the Ward Home Torrey Pine, Linden Avenue palm trees, and Portola sycamores, which are also identified as city landmarks in this section of the element. And lastly, number six, policies addressing preservation, conservation, and habitat for monarch butterflies, as well as nesting and roosting habitat for birds and bats. To provide some further clarification or more information regarding these policies, ESHA applies to wetlands and shoreline habitats, such as a reminder that ESHA applies to shoreline habitats such as the Harbor Seal haul-out area. And with regard to these policies, they're crafted as such. When new development or major redevelopment of properties may potentially result in adverse effects to ESHA, that requires, through policy, preparation of site-specific biological resources assessments to identify the extent of such impacts, policies that require the avoidance and minimization of direct and indirect impacts to those ESHA, as well as policies informing the mitigation or the approach to addressing or minimizing those impacts. Some important types of restoration or mitigation activities include restoration on site or restoration of an off-site parcel when no on-site restoration is feasible. These policies also address or identify measures for establishment of buffers and setbacks within ESHA for the protection of those resources, as well as the management of vegetation, the planting of native vegetation, whether that be for private site development or through city management of city-owned open spaces. And lastly, the identification and protection of wildlife corridors and habitat linkages, particularly along creeks and riparian corridors. In addition to the natural resources within the city, the open space and conservation element also addresses visual resources. An important distinction with this is visual resources within this element are public scenic vistas visual resources, such as those across the bluffs. This does not include protection of resources from private property or private spaces, such as backyards, back decks, or patios within residential areas. Policies for the protection of visual resources and the management include protection of public views of the Pacific Ocean, Carpinteria Bluffs, Carpinteria Salt Marsh, the San Ynez Mountains, and natural open spaces. Policies in this section require the evaluation of the magnitude of changes to the appearance of scenic resources or public vistas, as well as policies addressing the avoidance of substantial changes to broad, unobstructed public views of bluffs, beaches, streams, parks, and open spaces from areas of public scenic views. The requirement for visual analysis of potential effects for public view sheds or view corridors. And lastly, limiting light to protect night skies, glare, and spillover within the city. Other additional key resource areas within the open space and conservation element include discussion and inclusion of policies addressing agricultural and soils, particularly involving the preservation of the green belt around the city and the preservation of community orchards and agriculture, as well as the linkage to another element that we recently just discussed, healthy communities. A big aspect of that, if you might recall, is policies addressing or trying to focus on providing healthy foods and community gardens and things for the residents of the city. So those policies also tie into this conservation open space element in the agricultural portion as well. Next, we have water and mineral resources, policies primarily focused around the protection of drainages and water quality of our creeks and streams, as well as a new resource or section that's included as an other natural resource within the mineral resources subsection of the conservation element, being the identification of areas that are valuable for beach nourishment or materials for beach nourishment, and the importance of those in nourishing our beaches and establishing or enhancing shoreline protection of the city's beaches. And lastly is cultural and tribal culture resources, as well as historic resources, and policies addressing the preservation of known resources. So again, landmarks that have been identified within the city or historic areas of the city, as well as actions in response to the discovery of resources, such as incidental discovery from site development. Oops, apologies, I didn't have that slide up. So here we have a draft update to the environmentally sensitive habitat areas and related environmental resources or natural resources. A little bit difficult to see on this map, but in dark green are the areas that have been identified as ESHA areas within the city. This is informed by site investigations, general understanding of the city, as well as review of recent biological resources reports, and informed in consultation with the city's biologist. And in dark orange are the city's agricultural resources. Noted on this, or worth noting on this, is this updated map also includes consideration or designation of the Whitney parcel. That is an agricultural conservation easement in place and owned by the city just north of the 101 that resulted from Caltrans improvements to Highway 101. So a new community resource that's been identified since the 2003 general plan update. And for the second figure, This shows the city's designated landmarks and historic resources. So again, things like the Linden Avenue palm trees and other such resources that were identified in the 2003 General Plan Coastal Land Use Plan update. So that's about it for a very quick overview. I know we all want to get into discussion of the element, but before we do, just wanted to pose a few focus questions to the group to help inform some of the discussion. Some of those issues that we're hoping to receive some feedback on are whether or not there are any other natural or unique resources within the city that require consideration in this element, anything that we might have missed in the inventory of those open spaces or consideration of specific unique natural resources. We'd also like to discuss the protection and management of the harbor seal haulout and rookery. It's a very important, unique resource to the city, and policies were lacking or missing in previous planning documents that we've tried to address through this update. And so really hope to receive some input on the way that we've addressed those policies and addressed that resource. We'd like to ask the city if it's worth identifying visual resources on a map within the city. Is it in the city's interest to identify those and base planning decisions on the resources as mapped by the city? Or if we leave that open and generic and for consideration for staff when reviewing the impacts of site-specific development or other types of development in areas that could potentially obstruct public scenic views. Those that could be missed in maps or those that become new resources or failed to be considered in the identification of those resources on a map. Those are all things that we're contemplating. We'd also like to receive some input on how best we can balance the potential need for beach nourishment within the city and sediment deposition to protect the city shoreline through coastal resiliency and climate adaptation, creating dunes, so policies that help to support or tie into the coastal resiliency element, which we'll be discussing at a later date, and the city's efforts to restore portions of the beach or establish a new living shoreline on the city's beach. As well as any other actions or policies supporting climate resiliency actions in particularly sensitive areas of the city that are more adversely affected or subject to coastal hazards, coastal erosion, sea level rise. And very lastly, just want to say that we welcome any input and feedback on the draft open space and element of the Coastal Land Use Plan and General Plan update.
Okay. Any input as was requested?
Yeah. What are we going to do about the Chevron property? Just draw a line around it and go, wait? Or, I mean, I don't even know the status of what's happening. And that could affect open space and ESHA stuff, I suppose. I don't know. I don't even know. So that's a question. And there was another one I had. Oh, the view corridor thing. That's tough. I mean, how, depending on where you're standing or sitting, I mean, that is a tough thing to do and it gets very specific in a general plan. So, I mean, I'm not for that. I like the concept, and yes, they're valuable public views, but I don't know how you would measure that right now. Those are my thoughts for now.
Maybe, may I say something?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yes.
With regard to the view corridors, perhaps, Nick, you could be a little more specific. I've wondered as I read through all this exactly what that means. I mean, is it standing in Linden and I look up towards the San Ynez Mountains, that's a view corridor? Or if I'm over on one of the other streets and I look up, I mean, what is a view corridor?
My point.
And does a developer get to define a view corridor?
I mean, I think we ought to define it ourselves, not let somebody else do it, but what is it?
Because you see projects where you think the view corridor is this big, But then there's a plan with some buildings and the view corridor is all of a sudden this big. I've got a resource addition,
Yes.
which is looking at the primary haul out of the / rookery area on the map. And then to the left, there's a secondary haul out area in rocks. There's actually a tertiary haul out on some more extensive rocks. And it's, if you look at the railroad tracks where it says Higgins Spring, and you follow the railroad tracks up to where it makes a kind of a right-hand turn to go into the station, right there, or maybe it's even closer to that little bump out a little farther, the little bump out on the coast. That's in the state campground area. There's a bunch of rocks that the seals go to there also, historically. And I actually have a lot of comments about the policies, but we're going to do that later, is that right?
Through the chair. Yeah, I mean, I haven't been at one of these in a little bit, so I'm not sure how you're, thank you. I'm not sure how you're holding these meetings now, but typically, right, we look for initial questions from your committee that we can answer, and then we would hear from the public, and then we'd come back to you for your deliberations and feedback.
So can we have questions while you're presenting or after you present?
Yeah, I mean, right now I was just kind of taking notes on what the questions were from the various committee members, and then I think we can be prepared to provide at least initial responses to those questions. However you prefer.
Whatever's more convenient for you.
Yeah, let's see if we can just get through your questions, and we'll note them, and then we can circle back and try to address each of them.
And so all the ones from the policies? That was my initial question.
Okay, I see. I thought you just meant your initial questions here that we're kind
No,
of
no,
going through
no,
right
no.
now.
Okay, no. Okay.
And
Yeah, let's maybe just tackle kind of your initial high-level questions now, and then once we get into the deliberations, if you have, questions on specific policies, we can dig into those during the committee deliberations.
Okay.
So what are we doing? I am so confused.
Right now, just if you have kind of higher-level general questions about the draft element without getting into specific policies, maybe.
So, how does local landmarks get designated?
It's a state process.
So, through the chair, committee member Lee, local landmarks are, the way that the designation process for local landmarks is outlined in our municipal code. And so basically, a party wishing to receive landmark designation has to first apply to the county's Historic Landmark Advisory Committee and receive a recommendation or a temporary designation from their committee. And then that's referred back to our city council, who then has to take it up for consideration and a vote as to whether or not to make it a permanent landmark.
And any updates on the Chevron property? I know Jane asked about that.
Through the chair, so we are working with Chevron towards hopeful future decommissioning. So right now we are making the final round of edits and revisions to the environmental impact report that was prepared for the decommissioning project. It had been released for public review late last year and early this year. And we've been, since that time, going back and responding to the different comment letters that we received, in some cases going back and doing updates to some of the technical studies or resource studies to answer those comment letters. And our goal broadly speaking, is to have the final environmental impact report and the staff report for the permits ready to go to Planning Commission, thinking maybe late summer, early fall of this year.
Wow.
And so, conceivably, that could be sort of the first major milestone in making some headway towards the decommissioning of the Chevron facility. Once the city permits have been issued and the environmental document has been certified, there's a number of other regulatory permits that Chevron has to obtain before they can do certain parts of the work from the other resource agencies out there. So it may be that some things can start sooner than others. It's probably realistically a multi-year decommissioning project before the site is fully cleaned up and everything has been removed. And then as part of this general plan update committee or update work, we're trying to consider or plan for what the city would like to see happen with that property once the decommissioning work is completed. So, Mayor Clark may recall as a longtime member of the GPUC that several years back when we were working on this, we had at that time been envisioning portions of the Chevron facility or Chevron property perhaps going into an open space designation because of habitat value or ESHA value, and then other parts of it perhaps going to, at the time, a planned unit development designation, which is sort of a flexible zoning that can allow for residential, but also some commercial or hospitality or educational type uses. We haven't really circled back to that yet. We're saving the land use element for last in terms of what we want to discuss and share with your committee and gain feedback from the public on. So that's something we're going to get another chance here to revisit and see if that's still the direction we want to go, or if perhaps we want to head in a different direction with some of the future reuses of that property.
Thank you. That's more than I knew last week. It's just going to take years, though, right?
My recollection, just off the top of my head, is Chevron's estimating the decommissioning work would take 3 to 4 years.
Not too bad, but that's additional. What about the pier?
So the pier sits on tidelands that are owned by the city, and so I think by sort of default, the city is essentially the landlord for the pier, and it's leased to Chevron to support their offshore activities. Presumably, and I don't know if this has all been kind of finalized and settled, but presumably once Chevron is entirely done with the need for the pier, it would revert back to the city, and then the city has to decide what we would like to do with the pier long term. Potentially has some recreational value or educational value. The flip side of that is they're very expensive to maintain, and so the city would really have to think about how that's going to be accomplished.
Ferris wheel. Charge. Okay.
So what's our contract with Chevron in this regard? Do they have to give the pier back in the condition they found it, or?
Mayor Clark, I apologize. I don't know the details of that. I'm not sure if that's spelled out. It's probably spelled out in the original lease agreement. I'm just not
Yeah.
privy to all the inner workings of it.
Yeah. Okay.
Public comment.
Okay, well, then I'm going to save all my other questions till later. Any members of the public have any comments, questions about what'd you call it, general overarching?
Well, let's do the public hearing.
I think for public comment, anything you want to provide.
Now, first off, I just want to thank you all for working on this over all these years. It's kind of the culmination, maybe getting this admin draft up for 20 years, and realizing here I am stepping into it a bit late, but appreciate bringing it forward in front of us. So, my name is Patrick Crooks. I was born and raised in Carpinteria here, speaking today as a private citizen.
Oh, sorry, I guess.
Mic's not on. I gotta hit a button. Now it's green. You're good. Do you want me to start over? Or?
Just your name.
Patrick Crooks. So I'm speaking today as a private citizen and homeowner, not as president of the Citizens for the Carpinteria Bluffs, which I am. I also sit on a couple advisory boards to the city, the COSMAB, which is the Carpinteria Open Space Management Advisory Board, the Tree Advisory Board, and the IPM Committee. The Citizens for the Carpinteria Bluffs Board of Advisory is made up of over a dozen Carpinterians who led the charge to see the Carpinteria Bluffs Nature Preserve realized into what we are so fortunate to have today. And they remain committed and steadfast in that mission since the late 90s when the organization was founded. And I was in middle school back then. I'm a professional scientist, arborist, and wildlife biologist, and have been working professionally in that capacity for almost 15 years now. I've only recently reviewed the admin draft made available last Thursday and have been attempting to digest and process it as best as I could between my professional work and family life, raising 2 young boys, a 1- and 3-year-old with their rock star mother. I wanted to acknowledge a few policies that really caught my attention and wanted to expand further, specifically focusing on the afforded protections of white-tailed kite and all the raptor species under our California Fish and Game Code. And I said a few. I'm really speaking to one, as I didn't have enough time to really get into the policy that you guys have provided and updated, but I really appreciate it. So the one that I'm going to kind of point out here is OSC 7B, which might be on the last couple pages there about the 50-page staff report that you guys provided with the new draft conservation element. So that right now specifically speaks to new development setbacks shall be a minimum of 300 feet from nesting and roosting trees. Maybe it was supposed to say raptors, but the intent is that any trees that are utilized by raptors or sensitive, rare, threatened, or endangered birds. In addition, the maximum feasible area surrounding nesting and roosting sites shall be retained as grassland. So there's a little bit to point out in that specific piece as far as grassland. I think I get the intent where we're going, but bear with me a little bit kind of through what I had prepared here that's kind of honing in on that. And there's some documents out there currently. One of them is a Moore Mesa 2010 study that Rincon Consultants did for the county, really looking at the ESHA there out at Moore Mesa. If anybody's familiar with that, I'm sure most folks are. 250 acres out there compared to the bluffs, if you want to call it 50 acres of 80 acres of kind of consistent open habitat. But so there's that document for which the county has recognized any white-tailed kite nesting in the grasslands or any of that habitat that affords that ability for them to persist there. And then also the Gaviota Coast Plan that was certified by the Coastal Commission in 2018. And so there's some language in that as well that speaks to specific protections for white-tailed kite, which we do have and have had historically nesting on the Carpinteria Bluffs. So there's a little bit of specificity that I'll get into here that maybe calls it out. I mean, I think I don't have to go through it, but I guess I will. But there's policy out there in the county already affording protections to that. And so if we really focus in on OSC 7B, we're really pushing to understand that we're going to provide that habitat exclusively for raptors, which has been documented and, on many of these windrows, if we're just speaking to raptors and not protections for monarchs, specifically for overwintering. So I guess I just want to say I really appreciate this policy, specifically when focusing attention to the Carpinteria Bluffs 0 through 3 planning area. However, I would like to turn the clock back to March 1993 when I was 6 years old, just about 30 years ago. You can look at all the open, undeveloped land we had on the Carpinteria Bluffs. I would really appreciate protection of all the open, undeveloped land south of Carpinteria Avenue for a few main reasons, but ultimately it would be to further expand upon the preserves this community has chosen to support, both financially and in the public sphere. I intend to see that the biological resources within the preserves are fully protected and that locally they assist in the cumulative effort to see that species at risk are indeed recovering. That means that they have the best fighting chance to sustain their population and grow their population within what land and resources are left for them. That doesn't mean outright no development in our town or on our bluffs, but it means that raptors specifically are prioritized in kind of this instance. In our 2003 general plan, the entire Carpinteria Bluffs 0 through 3 was mapped ESHA with an overlay, and it remains today. The exact criteria for establishing the entire planning area of Bluffs 0 to 3 was not definitive, but most likely related to habitat for nesting raptors and overwintering monarchs. The onus was on the proposed development or change in use to prove that no biological resources would be significantly impacted. Raptors are afforded a minimum 300-foot buffer by Fish and Game Code while nesting until young have successfully fledged, which I believe the intent of OSC 7B mostly recognizes, as well as the preferred habitat of said raptor, kind of speaking to the white-tailed kite. And so if you're really to go back and remember and look at this figure that we have from, or photographs, aerial imagery from 1993, we've lost that, but we still have something denuded there. 20 years later, 30 years later, we're still seeing records and observation of white-tailed kite utilizing this habitat because their preferred prey do continue to persist. Maybe not at the same density and with many more hazards, dodge, golf balls in particular, but small opportunity continues. And so I'm speaking to this even right east of where we're sitting right here. Those tamarisk windrows are actually providing perch and roost habitat for the white-tailed kite to get out over the tea time property and those properties at large to hunt and to provide food for their young while they're nesting on the Carpinteria Bluffs Nature Preserve. So according to CDFW's life history account of white-tailed kite, which is a small little 2 or 3 page that CDFW provides for each species, the minimum home range necessary for successive offspring is 0.2 miles, which is roughly 1,000 feet, give or take. I would look for any revision of ESHA from the 2003 figure to include a minimum 1,000-foot buffer off of any tree species or snag currently persisting on the Carpinteria Bluffs to allow white-tailed kite the minimum necessary habitat for reproduction and survival of the species locally, having open lands with a minimum density of small mammals, ground squirrels, pocket gophers, and mice, are essential to the survival of our protected raptors while nesting. The minimum area required for hunting grounds for a pair of raptors to successfully rear young varies greatly from species to species, and so I'm speaking to red-tailed hawks, red-shouldered hawks, Cooper's hawks, all things that we've also had nesting out here on the Carpinteria Bluffs. But specifically for white-tailed kite, for the purposes of a unique rare coastal terrace on which the Carpinteria Bluffs is, all available habitat, meaning any open, unobstructed lands with prey for raptors, should be prioritized. This means no development within that footprint to assist in the success of our raptors. I was rather appalled at first glance after seeing on Thursday the deletion of ESHA in our coastal terrace, not having got to the back end of the document and seeing some protections afforded and maybe not fully understood. But I was a little surprised to not see much mention about the analysis that went into that, and I could be missing it, but all I saw was one line that was discussing how staff or the consultant arrived at that conclusion based on a mention of the city biologist's analysis from 2020. So that may be somewhere back there 4 or 5 years or maybe further, but it's not specifically addressed or mentioned in detail from what I was able to read through and gather. So that being said, I have a lot of questions about this. I'm happy to work through it with everyone and get a better understanding of how we're looking to categorize ESHA in our town. We have no comprehensive study on our biological resources on the Carpinteria Bluffs, mostly because a large portion are protected in perpetuity, and thus one would assume all wildlife and habitats are protected. They may not be. But I think policy OSC 1D from the 2003 general plan, the resources, it goes on to speak, the resources shall be protected against any disruptions. So this speaks perfectly to what we have right now, and recognizing that the white-tailed kite is a fully protected species under state Fish and Game Code. It really shall be protected against any disruption, which means no development within its minimum necessary area to reproduce successfully. I guess I went on a little further to look just at the consistency of the first 4 policies, OSC 1A, 1B, 1C, 1D from the 2003 general plan that, I think kind of tie into that same ESHA thought. Yeah, so again, just going through the red-tailed hawk, Cooper's hawk, red-shouldered hawk, all documented, nested on the Carpinteria Bluffs. Just really asking you guys to consider if adjacent uses could have impact on these resources, which I would argue they absolutely do, and would look to recommend that staff and the consultant dive deeper into reviewing guidance provided at the county level for criteria to provide an ESHA overlay. And I believe, I might have written it up wrong, but it's in the comprehensive plan at the county level that I believe was also certified by the Coastal Commission in 2010, so pretty recent. And I think that Moore Mesa study that I referred to, similar to the ESHA mapped on Moore Mesa, for those that are familiar with the area, come to realize ESHA afforded those raptors habitat and protection of that habitat for its hunting grounds. So you can find that document out there where Santa Barbara County moved forward with maintaining ESHA, and that comprehensive study was done. That was done out of UCSB back in the 80s, and this was kind of a follow-up on that very comprehensive study, more than the stuff that I do in my day-to-day work, but actually was out there trapping mammals, small mammals, identifying the prey out there and making the case and understanding that those prey items are out there on that landscape, which the biological resource assessment that was recently prepared for this project right next door does qualify that those mice, voles, pocket gophers, ground squirrels are all out there. Not all of those are the preferred white-tailed kite prey items, but we have records, folks on eBird and folks at the county Santa Barbara Audubon Society with documented use of those foraging grounds. So I'd really love to see that those protections are afforded to our raptors specifically. To be able to continue to utilize those resources before they were developed. So kind of speaking to 30 years ago, what we had, we're actually still seeing those species have an ability to survive here and persist, but really just looking that we revisit those items specifically. So sorry, that was probably a lot and out of left field, but I know there's plenty of other stuff to get through here, so really appreciate it. And I'm happy to answer any questions if you guys have any more things thinking about.
About the kites. So you mentioned the tamarisk windrows.
Mm-hmm.
How many tamarisk windrows are there?
So the tamarisk windrow just east of the Carp Skate Park, documented occurrences there, I guess kind of when eBird started, maybe 2010, 2012, when people were really getting more into it. So we have
I've seen
what tamarisk windrows?
Yeah, I
So
remember one tamarisk.
Well, so that tamarisk, so I'm speaking to what's currently out there, not what we used to have on the Carpinteria Bluff. So the tamarisk windrow that's just east of the Carp Skate Park, and then the tamarisk I would call them windrows. I mean, they're 100 feet long, but that vegetation type's providing perching, hunting grounds, perches to allow them to hunt.
So just east means
both sides
immediately
of the T-Times properties on both those sides.
I'm just familiar with the one that was removed, and we used to see the kites over there extensively.
Yeah, and that
we haven't seen any out there since that road's
We have.
been removed.
We have.
That's good.
It's few and
Good,
far.
that's great.
It's few and far between, and I won't pretend to be an avid expert birder. I get out there and do enough of it, but we do have folks in our community and in the region. I mean, white-tailed kite are a rarity here on the coast, and people are excited to see them, similar to the harbor seals.
Yeah, they seem to go over to the ag land sometimes. And that I guess it's eucalyptus trees over there. I don't know, but.
Yeah, it's really from my understanding with white-tailed kite, not a ton of observations myself, but really they're going to utilize any of those perches that are going to give them vantage points to hunt, right?
Yeah.
And so the tamarisk windrow did that on the Carpinteria Bluffs for so long, and they've kind of moved off of those, is my best guess. But the windrows that we do have, the eucalyptus, also provide that same. But it's a competition of resources between all the hawks out there.
Nice. Well, thank you so much for your comments.
Yeah, cool. Appreciate it.
Anybody else? Welcome, Mike.
Patrick saved you from a bunch of comments I would have made about white-tailed kites. So I'll just summarize on the kites that to emphasize a point Patrick made was that the Coastal Commission considers all white-tailed kite foraging and habitat to be ESHA, and it's concerning to have our proposed ESHA map remove mapped ESHA from the 2003 plan when that justification doesn't seem to be there. And it seems like the possible reason for that is that in the staff reports, it lists the sensitive biological resources that were considered for the new ESHA map and does not mention raptors or kites specifically. So it seems that to be an omission. Patrick went into the detail, fully agree with the points he was making. In a different topic, in the section about the sediment management, the policies talked about the benefits of beach quality sediments for beach nourishment from the debris basins. And this has been a consistent omission in public statements by the city that not everything coming out of the debris basins is beach quality sediments. And in fact, there is documentation that the sediment disposal at the end of Ash Avenue smothered the nearshore offshore habitat and resulted in high ammonia levels, which results from oxygen deprivation of that habitat. And so that comes from a high percentage of fines, meaning fine-grained materials, silt, stuff that when you put it on the ocean floor, it smothers everything under it. Beach nourishment, as is mentioned in the document, is sand and cobble, things that stay. The fines not only have no help in beach nourishment, they also damage the ecosystem that's there. So we would urge that the general plan recognize that and clarify that in the wording, and suggest that the city consider if the desired programmatic EIR that we want the county to do about their debris basin management, if there's any way we could incorporate part of that environmental review in the general plan update by pointing out how important the beach nourishment is. If beach nourishment is important and it's a priority in the general plan, it would seem that environmental review of that would be appropriate or even necessary. So if the county's not going to do their job and keep living on emergency permits, maybe this is one way the city can get its foot in the door to get some real environmental analysis on nearshore intertidal damage from the nourishment and so on. Okay. One other area, I believe, view sheds. The terminology seems to be a little bit not as precise as it could be. There is reference to view sheds, vistas, and view corridors. And it's not clear in any definition I saw in the document how a view shed is different from a vista. And it does have a definition on page 16 of public view, and it mentions a framed view as a view corridor. Okay, that's close to a definition. But then it mentions wide angle or panoramic public views. Those seem similar. I'm not sure if it's trying to be inclusive or if there's a distinction between those. I worry that ambiguity leaves wiggle room in the general plan. The biggest protection we have in our current general plan for the tea time property is the views, the view sheds, the view corridors, whatever. So I don't want to accidentally lose protection on other areas because of ambiguous wording. And then in section policy OSC 11D, it mentions a number of things. It mentions that development shall be designed to minimize impacts to views and development requiring a view corridor. I strongly urge that that be made potentially plural, that as written, this seems to require one view corridor, which can be one view of one rock on the mountain, and that's a view corridor. So that should be looked at.
No, but what's, I don't want to interrupt you, but that's kind of what's the definition of view corridor? But go ahead.
Yeah, and that's I'm looking for definitions. I'm encouraging definitions, but whatever it is, more of them is better than one.
Yeah.
That's the point I'm making there. And then, actually, that'd be it. And I just point out that on page 16, that definition is a starting point, the definition of public view. But I would hope that precise wording would be used for views, view shed, vistas, public views, and view corridors. Thanks.
Thanks for your comments. Can I ask a quick question?
Yes.
About the fines?
Yes.
So are those smothering vegetation? What's a precise impact?
It's it's ecosystem. I believe I'm not an expert in that area. I believe it's both vegetation and fauna and animals too.
Yeah, because the vegetation would be the habitat for the animals.
Right, but yes, and we're talking about the ocean bottom. We're not talking about kelp forest. We're talking ocean bottom.
Okay.
So subsurface life.
Oh, okay.
Clams, worms.
Yeah.
Things like that that live in the sediment. They have siphons to get up to the water, and when you bury that, they're buried.
Yeah.
So that's my understanding, roughly,
Yeah. Okay.
of what that habitat is.
Great. Thank you so
Thanks.
much. Anybody else? There is somebody else. Welcome, Patrick.
Thank you, Mayor and Council and Commission and staff. I just have a quick comment regarding open space and sort of hitting on a nail that I've hit on a number of times that we've all talked about is the notion of the buffers and otherwise setbacks associated with open space. Particular case that keeps coming up is the riparian setback along creeks. Would love to see, as belt and suspenders type of administrative approach in the land use element that, or I should say the open space element, and later hopefully in the land use element, that those corridors or those setbacks not be used as calculations for lot coverage or for density calculations. And I think this is a place to do that, and there's probably other places too. So that's my comment. Thanks.
Thank you. It does just make a general comment about, I think one of the things that we do, one of the goals that we do want to have with this update is to remove wiggle room, is to make things as clear-cut as possible.
Well, lots of other cities have defined view corridors. I think we could cannibalize some of those. It's basically to preserve the view, so we have to figure out what that means in real life.
What if we put it in there to retain a certain percentage of 180 view from, say, a rock in the mountains or the beach?
But unobstructed.
Yeah. So 50%, 80%.
I know, we have to come up with something generic enough, but important enough to
Yeah.
catch their attention. That's a tough one.
And we previously had a project we reviewed on the bluffs 30 years ago. And they had view corridors, but they were about 10 feet wide.
Yeah, like
So it's like,
a corridor in a trailer.
my wife did a painting of one. I've attempted to bring it tonight.
Okay, any more speakers? Okay. Close the public hearing.
We have no speakers on Zoom, so unless there's anyone else here, that would be the end of public comment.
I would just like to add a comment regarding the nourishment and the silt that's coming from the runoff from all the storms, that the city, that we could be perhaps more precise about what is okay to be channeling out into our beaches and what is not. I don't know how we can prevent fine-grained silt from coming our way, but is there anything that we can do or language that we can include in here that would protect our flora and fauna in the water? Is someone saying anything? I can't hear a
No,
thing.
no one's saying anything.
You're stymied everyone.
Apologies. I think right now we were just jotting down the comments, and we're happy to take a stab at addressing some of these things now, or just noting them for us to circle back and work on as we continue to refine the element here. I'm not, we're sort of at your pleasure in terms of how you want to go about this.
Well, are we going to be reviewing the policies?
We have that opportunity to do that as well. We're not planning on our end of, reading through each of them individually, but we've shared them with you ahead of the meeting, and if you've got, comments or
Oh,
questions
okay.
on specific policies, we can
Okay,
try to answer those.
all right.
Well, I have a question. Are there any state laws that specifically address ESHA? Anything was kind of disregard that completely?
Through the mayor, committee member Lee, yes, there are a number of laws all throughout different sections of the government code and other, state laws that protect ESHA, right? So, for example, the Coastal Act contains a number of laws and policies that protect certain types of ESHA. The California Fish and Game Code does as well. There's a number of different places, and so some of what you're seeing in our general plan language is sort of a high-level attempt at kind of codifying some of that stuff at the local level and reiterating it, or in some cases adding on to it with additional, more site-specific levels of protection.
I have a general comment. I'm happy to see that we have so many shalls in the policies here. However, there's a lot of them that actually get qualified, and I can't remember any exact language, I don't see any right here in front of me, by if it's feasible or not. And the problem with that is the developer thinks it's too expensive, so it's not feasible. And so the shall then becomes a won't. So, I mean, I don't know what to do with those. I mean, is there no absolute protection for some things? Anyway, that was just a general comment I had about a lot of the policies that I read.
These policy, I need to understand what policies.
They're at the end of the section.
Open space.
You have to go all the way to the end. It's not like the 2003 where the
Okay.
policies were
I got you.
in and amongst, but they're at the end.
Okay.
Yeah, they're at the end.
So why don't we go over those? What's the problem?
Well, there's a lot, and it's a lot of pages.
Well, we could do it now or do it later. I'll do it later. This is your deal.
Well, I looked at it.
I looked at it.
So there's a policy 1F, windrow removal and replacement, and it talks about a coastal development permit. Well, my question is, what if it's the city that's doing the windrow removal? Is the city also bound to this requirement?
The way the policy is written currently, we would be bound to this requirement as well, and we would also be obligated to apply for and obtain our own coastal development permit. So in this case, it would be something like the Parks Department applying for a coastal development permit for a restoration project, for example, to replace a windrow with something else.
Okay. And then I've got a few comments on the harbor seal protection. Beginning with 4D, which states there'll be a 35-foot minimum buffer area on the beach around any animal or area where seals have congregated year-round shall be observed at all times. So I'm not really sure what the basis for that comment is. If it's meant to protect the seals, I think if anybody that comes within 36 feet of them is going to scare them for sure, unless you've got camouflage on or something. I don't know where they come up with the number 35. I'd like to know what the basis for that is. And what it seems to also do is to, because of the language here, the seals congregate everywhere on the beach. And this says, where seals have congregated year-round shall be observed at all times. And so that would seem to be basically closing off all of the beach. So if so, that's, during the pupping season, it says it extends to December 1st to May 31st. So, I mean, if you're going to comply with this, then do you have a sign on the beach 750 feet away during the pupping season that says don't go past this point? And then the rest of the time you have a sign 35 feet away from where all seals have congregated? Anyway, I think we should look at that.
Yeah, we can look into that. I don't know what the basis of the 35-foot buffer is. I just earlier, I tried to take a quick look at the Marine Mammal Protection Act to see what it recommends, and it suggested a
300.
50-yard
50 yard.
buffer from land viewing of marine mammals like seals and sea lions. So we can kind of circle back with the biologist on the consultant team and see if they're looking at or referencing a different study or
I think there is. I think
kind
there
of-
was a study. I think this is a policy that was in the old plan, so it's just transferred over.
Okay.
So it's been in there for 20 years.
And then we can also take a look at the intent or the clarity of the language to get to your point of, is this steering the city towards a year-round closure, which I know is something that the Harbor Seal Advisory Committee has been discussing, although I don't know if they have yet forwarded any kind of formal recommendation on that to the council for consideration.
Okay.
I have a comment about OSC 4E. It's about the seal watch. At the end of the paragraph, it says, provide information on the seal population and seal sensitivity to human disturbance. I'm wondering if you could be more explicit in that, because seals are, from what I've heard, are astonishingly sensitive to practically anything. That you walk by with keys and you just rattle a little in your pocket, they all hear it. It seems like you could add some more information there. I also wonder about, in closing off the beach, we have volunteers at either end of the seal rookery to tell people not to walk, which is, they're not always there, it's not always effective. Is it possible to put a temporary barrier there, a fence or something, or is that they would just be knocked over in all the storm during the winter? It's not feasible.
Yeah, and not only the storms, but we also have varying sand levels. So you put the barrier in on Tuesday, and next week you'd be walking on top of the barrier or
Okay.
underneath the barrier. So
Well, it seems like we could be more creative than just a volunteer. No solutions from this
you don't think
corner.
volunteers are creative?
Well, no, I mean, I'm not trying to say that, just that the volunteers are there and they say you shouldn't go any further. And you would think most people would respect that, but a lot of people don't respect that.
Well,
That-
they generally do.
Okay.
They generally respect that. And
Okay.
if they don't, the volunteer calls the cops. So the cops come over.
Oh,
Okay.
you're arrested
That's how that
for
works.
bothering a seal.
That rarely happens.
Okay.
Let's see, what else have I got?
What's a bird-safe window treatment? I mean, it won't hit the window? I mean, how does it know? That's a policy in here.
Jane, where are you?
Ah.
There was, there was mention in here somewhere about birds and windows. Is that what you're talking about?
OSC2S. Nope, yeah. I don't know what that is. Do you have a sign, no birds?
Committee member Benefield, I don't know exactly what that refers to, but I believe there are, kind of treatments that can be applied to the exterior of building glass in order to make them not appear so visually transparent so that birds, aren't inclined to try to fly through them. I don't know if that means it's just a darker tint or it's some other kind of colored tint to make it apparent, but I think there's some kind of treatment that can be applied to.
Another reason to keep our 30-foot height limit. Saving birds.
So
This
I
is
also,
over 1 story.
Correct.
New
As worded right now, it
commercial or
says new
multi-story.
commercial or multi-story development adjacent to ESHA or park and open space areas.
Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna.
I also wanted to bring up implementation action number 1. What page is that on? 31.
Okay, I'm there.
So it's saying as a condition for approval of any future development west of the Carpinteria Bluffs Nature Preserve, the project proponent shall plant a screen of vegetation at the harbor seal viewpoint as mitigation for increasing the number of people in proximity to the harbor seal haul-out area. Number 1, there's already a vegetative screen there planted by Seal Watch. And 2, that's not on his property, it's on Chevron property. I know that he wanted, prior to the conceptual review, he had employed a biologist to be over there for a year who gathered a lot of data about the seals and spent some days regularly there doing seal watch. And it was apparently his notion that he was going to have his own seal watch on his property, his own overlook on his property. And
What are you talking about?
I'm not sure where this comes from. But I'd really like you to find out where this came from. And it's also requiring him to install an interpretive monument, which we already have.
But when you say he, who do you mean?
Well, it could be she, I guess.
No.
Sorry about that.
I don't mean that. It's just the,
I know, in fact, his name is Matthew Goodwin, but it says, as a conditional approval for any future development west of the Carpinteria Bluffs Nature Preserve, the project proponent shall plant a screen of vegetation, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't know if that's supposedly his mitigation for introducing thousands of more people to, bombard the seals or not. But I don't know how that's going to work.
Mayor Clark, we'll have to look into this one. I don't recall what the history or the provenance of this implementation measure is. My initial guess would be that some variation of this exists in our current general plan, coastal plan, and that we just, reheated it or refined it. Or perhaps in the open space bluffs master plan, there's also, I think, some language that obligates the bluffs to property owner in a future redevelopment scenario to make improvements for a seal overlook. So it may be something that's kind of spun out of that as well. So we can go back and take a look at where this came from. But point taken that the existing primary overlook area is all or mostly on Chevron property and has some of these amenities that you're already talking about.
Yeah, and the other, well, the part of the property that is his is experiencing a lot of bluff erosion right now, and it's really not good for people to stand next to the edge of the bluffs right there.
Right, and I think in at least the preliminary plans that were submitted, it had contemplated, if an overlook was created on that property, of setting it back considerably from the bluff edge, which may impact how successful it is at providing views of the seals, but would at least mitigate the bluff erosion threat, I suppose.
I was a little curious about the 4-foot height mentioned in here. What is it? The developer shall be responsible for maintaining the plantings until the 4-foot height and 100% opacity standards are reached. Does that, once it's 4 feet high, it means that it's going to grow higher?
No, I think it means 4 feet would deter somebody from falling off the edge or something.
I think it's also meant to help create an actual blind, kind of type effect so that, people aren't readily apparent up on the bluff edge from the seals down below.
So the seals are actually, they're, as Catherine mentioned, they're extremely skittish, but they're also highly adaptive. When we first start watching seals at the beginning of the season, we have to be very careful and be behind blinds, or we will scare them in the water ourselves while we're watching them. But they gradually grow accustomed to us, so that by the time the pups are born, you can just stand in full view, and you can have a crowd of people standing in full view, as long as they're not shouting and waving their arms. It's not going to scare the seals. They're always skittish though, and they're always looking at you. But I think that what we don't have a blind there now, and it's fairly open. There's just a rope installed by Chevron, and we keep it open so the little kids can see the seals, and we had no accidents or people slipping or anything in 35 years. So doesn't mean that one couldn't happen, but I'm curious about the water resources, and would there ever be anything in this section about how much water do we have, and what's our build out in terms of expected water supply?
That is going to be in the program EIR. We didn't want to put it in this general plan because it's going to be something that fluctuates from year to year.
Okay.
Can we loop back to pages as sort of a root here comment, but on page 28, at the top of it, where this is section OSC 3A, and then you have it A, B, and then C. Okay, if this is a document, this is like, okay, I spent many years as a journalist for general readers. If this is a document that we want everyone to be able to understand and read, then when you use terms like hydrophytic cover, mesophytic, or xerophytic cover, I have to look it up in the dictionary. I think it's possible either that you use simpler words or you put in parenthesis and define it. And I could say that for a few other terms in here, like riparian. which is not one that's used in common parlance. I
It
just
is in
think,
Carpinteria.
It is in Carpenter. Riparian, you
well,
gotta learn
not for
that
this
one.
Carpinteria citizen, and I think I'm going for the lowest common denominator, but I think we should make this a very readable document.
Committee member Slant, we can certainly include those terms in the glossary that will be included as an appendix with the general plan, coastal plan. In the case of some of those terms that are in policy OSC 3A, that's just lifted straight out of state law. So we're restating what the definition is of a wetland under the state law, and rather than wordsmithing their language or choosing other terms, we've just copied state law verbatim.
Sure, but you could put in parenthesis what it is.
Or, as I said, we would include it in the glossary.
Okay, I mean, the glossary, and this is another comment. I asked before about a cheat sheet at the beginning of this. I suggest a cheat sheet for each chapter, so people can make it just really easy. And you could have a glossary for each chapter. Make it really easy for people when they're reading it to be able to find these things, not have to flip back 200 pages to the glossary or the cheat sheet.
Yes, we, through the mayor, we are putting that together. It's the acronym list, but we're not doing it during the admin draft. We're going to add it after all of the admin drafts have been reviewed, and then we put the draft final together.
I'm just suggesting that you might have a cheat sheet for each chapter.
Understood. Thank you. Yes.
I have a question on OSC 4J. Motorized vehicle access to the beach area shall be prohibited. And I've seen electric bikes go on the beach. I've seen
Illegal.
what appear to be, I don't know if you would call them motorcycles, somewhere between a bike and a motorcycle with really fat tires. Is there any way to enforce not having any of these things on the beach?
Yeah, I was going to bring that up also. Since we're on the beach a lot seal watching, we see them. In fact, they blow by us and go in and disturb the seals. So, and they come and go so fast the cops can't respond. It's just
We've had a,
impossible to enforce.
oh, I'm sorry, forgot where I was. We have a terrible issue in the marsh with the speeding bikes that nearly kill little children. It's just been awful. I can't look anymore. City knows.
Yeah, we can look into this, whether that language can include or be expanded to specifically include e-bikes. My understanding is that, they kind of exist in a little bit of a legal gray area
Now they do.
currently. And so, in terms of whether they're a bicycle or a motor vehicle, and because of that, people are using them in any number of ways that they maybe, shouldn't or weren't originally intended for. I think this is probably something that's going to continue to evolve over the next few years until the state steps in and makes a decision one way or the other.
Doesn't mean anybody will listen.
What's to prevent CARP from saying no electric bicycles on the beach?
We might be able to. It's just something I think we need to look into, one, and then, figure out if there's a meaningful way to enforce it.
That's the enforcement is the killer.
I also see young kids on them. I mean, kids, they appear to me to be like, I don't know, 8, 9, 10 years old
Right.
on an electric bicycle. You have to be 18 to get a driver's license. It's understood that you have to be older to be able to handle a car, and these very young kids driving bikes that can go quite fast.
Do you know if the proposed park ranger position will have the authority to issue tickets or something?
Mayor Clark, so currently, as far as I know, the park ranger position has not been funded or allocated for or discussed as
No,
being
I know that.
funded.
But that's being
But-
talked about.
Yeah, long-term, there is talk of trying to create a park ranger position, and if there were then, local ordinances on the books or as part of something like the vehicle code, a park ranger may be able to issue citations. I think it probably depends in part on how we craft that position.
Right, okay.
Right, so if we craft it like a compliance officer where they have that enforcement authority and citation authority, then they could issue citations.
Yeah, okay. All right, what else?
I have a question about many of these things. It says update, and then it says timing within 5 years, timing within 10 years. And I'm looking at it, I'm like, why 5 years or 10 years? Why do these things why do they always take so long?
Commissioner Slant, through the mayor, that is just giving us, it can be done within the first year of adoption, but it's giving us the flexibility due to budget and staffing to be able to implement all these various measures. Did you have anything to say?
And just to build off that a little bit, right? I mean, the way to think about this is the general plan is this high-level sort of vision document for the goals of the city over the next, 20, 25 years. And so throughout the general plan elements, there's a number of these implementation measures that are attached to some kind of a timeline. So sometimes they're prioritized based on urgency, and those more urgent ones might have a shorter, more immediate timeline. Some of them that are either a larger, more complicated task, or maybe have funding or staffing considerations, or might be tied to some other kind of state mandate, like an update to the the state's stormwater general permit. Those types of things are going to be farther out, and they may take 5 years to work through or 10 years to get to. And so we're trying to be cognizant of that and trying to set realistic expectations for when some of these things can be completed, rather than over-promising and under-delivering with 1-year timelines and all these things, knowing that we can't achieve it.
Okay, understood.
I'll make a general comment. Overall, great job. The document looks great. I do agree with the comments made by Patrick and Mike to add what they have said to the document. Very good comments. But other than that, just, yeah. And what Al said. A lot of things he said I agree with, so specifically about the CO rookery. And the view shed, that's a tricky one. I would like it to be more focused towards new development and how it impacts the surrounding neighborhoods and the community.
Those are private views sometimes, not public views. We need to decipher which is public and which is private.
Yeah. So, in terms of preserving as much of the view shed corridor as possible, with those lines.
So I did want to touch a little bit on view sheds and view corridors and vistas, and kind of see if we can get some more direction from your committee on this one, because I think it is important. In the existing general plan, coastal plan, it's mostly fairly broad and non-specific language about protection of view corridors, protect views to the mountains, protect views to the ocean, protect views from the Carpinteria bluffs. And in a couple specific cases, there might be something that gets drilled down to a little higher level of specificity, right? Where it'll say, views from the, new development on the Carpinteria bluff should be set back sufficiently that it's not visible from the sandy beach below. Okay, that's specific, that's helpful. Or, specific view corridors up and down Linden Avenue, up and down Baylord Avenue should be protected. That perhaps is helpful as well. And I think we're kind of struggling a little bit going forward of what's that right mix or blend of these kind of broad, high-level view protection statements versus something that drills down to that little bit greater level of specificity and provides maybe a higher level of protection to, really key critical view corridors or view sheds or vistas, right? So maybe, public views towards the ocean or the mountains from open spaces like the Carpinteria Bluffs gets a higher level of protection than, say, a glimpse of the mountains over existing development on 8th Street in the downtown, right? So there's nuance there, and that's where we're kind of looking for some feedback from your committee on how can we strike that appropriate balance of really, kind of drilling down and protecting those super critical, really key view corridors and view sheds that we have, while also having enough flexibility to, provide some level of protection to those other views where they exist, but that maybe are of, kind of more marginal quality or don't have that same, really critical community level of importance.
Maybe you have to define where the corridors are. And I say they should be public corridors, like down Linden. That's a big deal. And I think we could say something, craft something there. But you can't get too specific with private development or developed areas if they want to rebuild. You might shoot yourself in the foot with that one. But I do go for the public views from, like you said, open space, the bluffs, whatever. We can narrow them down.
Well, somewhere else in the plan and in the existing plan, we talk about maintaining the character of the city and certainly the character of neighborhoods. And I think it's a characteristic of Carpinteria and one of its charms that no matter where you are in the city, you can look up and see the mountains, because I guess because we're low density and we have the building height restriction. And so when we start to have, I don't know how you can incorporate that in there, but in addition to looking up Linden, I mean, being able to look up anywhere.
So, Nick, I think you did a great job identifying corridors. The downtown T is a good way to be more specific about protecting those view shed from from south to north and east to west. If we can protect those view shed from
I think
from
that's a good overall point. I mean, we are very detailed about what we want to see on the bluffs, but, are there other, views that are important? And I think that's a good point you raised.
Thanks. So downtown T.
I'm going to add another layer of complication to this for you a little bit, which is,
Perfect.
right, that with housing projects in particular, we're really limited only to being able to enforce objective standards. And so, to have a chance at being able to protect something like views, you're really going to have to find a way to articulate it in an objective manner. And that's not necessarily the job of the general plan, but that would be the job of the zoning code that then needs to implement the general
We
plan.
do have that, it's 30 feet,
We have that currently, although we are also being,
challenged.
challenged or pushed by the state to, at least in some locations, bump that height limit up in order to accommodate 3-story development.
We're under assault.
Yes.
This is where I'm trying to look for, kind of those kernels, right, where we're gonna draw the line and hold the line on something like Linden Avenue, but maybe have to compromise a little bit in other places in order to help meet our other goals, right, like state housing mandates, for example.
Very tricky.
But I guess, you have the opportunity to see the beach and the mountains from many places.
True. And I think we can, generally continue to try to preserve that, particularly on, on, say, north and south running streets, up the street corridors. It may get trickier on our east-west running streets, say 8th Street, 7th Street, even parts of Carpinteria Avenue. as infill occurs and that skyline starts to come up a little bit and crowd out some of those existing glimpses over the tops of buildings or between buildings. And so I think that's what I'm trying to understand going forward as we're crafting some of these view protection policies is, should those be afforded the same level of protection as that view up and down Linden Avenue? Or from something like the Carpinteria Bluffs or Tar Pits Park.
I don't know.
I don't know. But I would say public views, yeah, important. Come up with some kind of criteria. But yeah.
Let's say, I'm actually looking at the old one now. And I just on that page, it said, preserve broad unobstructed views from the nearest public street to the ocean, including but not limited to Linden, Baylord, Carpinteria Avenue, US Highway 101. And I know other places they talk about mountains.
Yeah, I think this discussion needs to continue on to the next one, and once you come back with some revisions, we can be more specific about view corridors and any additions.
So,
It sounds a little simple perhaps, but when I get back to CARP, I also propose personally as a planning commissioner, walk around the city and look at the views and see what is the commonality and how we can more precisely define it. Rather than say, we can see the mountains everywhere, let's quantify that in some way or qualify it.
Yeah, we got some homework to do.
Seems like we're not going to get there tonight.
I agree.
no, tonight we're just looking for, some feedback and guidance so that we can, take your comments and go back and tinker on this a little bit more. And then later this year, when we're ready to share an official public draft of the complete document, that'll be kind of the next opportunity, I think, to circle back and specifically discuss how we've done or what's still missing or what needs some further refining or tweaking. And I think the intention is probably to do that over the course of a couple of public meetings and then head into, kind of the first of the actual legislative hearings, which would be a planning commission hearing to receive feedback on the general plan update and hopefully a recommendation to eventually move on to city council. So, we're ways off on that still. We've got a couple more elements that we still need to share with you, but the goal is to kind of gather all this feedback over the course of these meetings and use that to help inform the final edits to the public draft before we get it back out there in front of you.
We're having a meeting in a month, right? And for the next one?
Yeah, I think the intention for that was to review perhaps circulation next.
And I suggest before we get into the next part, we just talk a little bit about this. I mean, it's an issue that we all agree is really important, and we haven't come to any conclusions here. And we can talk about it again briefly at the next meeting.
Yeah, if that's something that the committee as a group would like to do, I think we can try to take a stab at making some refinements to at least the view language here in particular and having that be part of next month's discussion.
Okay, I mean, and
So
we can
Jane-
also
Jane-
take a stab at it.
Jane mentioned this sort of distinction between private views and public views. And, what we have seen on the farm proposal is taking public views and making them private views. And so I think that's something we don't want to happen in other places of town as well.
Yeah, why don't we have a 20-minute discussion or something? I mean, I'm not the chair. I keep forgetting that.
This is wide open.
I
I'm
mean,
going to take
we could-
control for a while. Go ahead.
I mean, a discussion on the view is pretty important for Carpinteria, and then go into the next elements. I think that's probably a good idea. What do you think?
So continue this discussion for the next meeting?
Yes,
Agreed?
Agreed.
okay.
You introduced it, girl.
Okay, we can do that.
Is that it? Have we done it?
That's up to you.
All
Is
right,
that it?
so we're going to adjourn the meeting now.
Great, and we'll be back on July 15th.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Thank you.